What's up, Packet Nation? So in this video, we're going to talk about DNS encryption. So how we can actually get behind that green lock when it comes to our DNS lookups. So first, let's talk about where DNS encryption typically resides. Last time we talked about DNSSEC and how that's usually validating the records that we receive to our resolver back here. But now we want to focus on this little piece between our client and our resolver. Now, we can do this a few different ways. One is DNS over TLS. Another is DNS over HTTP, and that's the one that I want to show for you today. So we're going to capture DNS over HTTP. We're going to decrypt it so we can actually see what it looks like behind that green lock. So let's get to it. All right, I'm just going to show you how to do this with my MacBook Pro. So the first thing that I got to do is I got to export my environment variable, the SSL keylog file, and I got to save that to a file. So I'm just going to say I got a folder called keys, and I'm just going to save this to SSL keys. .log. Now, what that does is all of the new keys that are generated, the TLS keys that are generated by Firefox, will be stored to this log. So I have to capture a trace file as well as store these keys at the same time with the same session. But something else that I got to do is I got to fire off Firefox as well. So let's go ahead and do, first let's just get that generating. And then I'm going to say open-a. Okay, so it opens up a Firefox profile, and what's going to happen is that Firefox is going to store all those keys to that keylog. So while that's up, something I'm going to do is open up Wireshark. And the first thing I'm going to do with Firefox is just come over here and go to Settings. And I want you to see this real quick. So I'm just going to say DNS. Now, by default, on this copy of Firefox, I have max protection, and that is enabled DNS over HTTPS. So that's a setting that's already built in there, and that means it's going to send all of my DNS over HTTPS. So it's just going to be TCP port 443, and it will not be UDP DNS like I'm used to seeing. It'll all go over HTTPS. What I want to say first is just off. So let's just first turn it off, and then I'm going to come back to my regular good old system, and I want to first start my capture, because you know that. So let's just go ahead and get that cooking. And then I'm going to say two things. So I'm just going to go to www.packetpioneer.com, if I could just type today. Okay, so I'm first going to let this kick off. So I'm interested in what DNS looked like going to my site. But now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to that setting, and I'm going to say DNS. This time, max protection. So I want all DNS to go over HTTPS. Now this time, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to come up here to my same tab up here, or let's just open up a new one, and I'm going to say wireshark.org. So now this should have done a DNS query over HTTPS. So now that I've captured DNS over HTTPS, we're going to go ahead and open it up in Wireshark, and then we're going to decrypt it because we were able to capture those session keys. All right, so here's our PCAP. Now remember that I did this twice. I first started with Firefox with no DNS over HTTPS. So that means that we can see some clear text DNS still. And in fact, if I just come up here, I'm going to go ahead and just type in DNS. By the way, I did include this PCAP down below. You're welcome. And I actually included it for you decrypted. So let's go ahead and first show you what I did here to give you that file. Now, first with DNS, you can see here that I've got packetpioneer.com. I've got an A record. I'm looking for an HTTPS record. More on that in just a moment. And I do get a response here. And then I head on out to the Packet Pioneer website, opening up a few different TCP connections. You can see all that here. So this is pretty standard procedure, right? I have DNS over UDP in clear text. So remember, that's the first thing that we did with Firefox. But next, we enabled HTTP or DNS over HTTPS. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to look for a bit of a jump in time. You see packet number 120? This is where I get another interesting connection that kicks off. So here's my local address, and then I go out to this 162.159.61.4. I start up that TCP connection, and then I fire up my TLS handshake. Now this is going out to the SNI of mozilla.cloudflare-dns.com. Now remember that I changed that setting in Firefox to then use DNS over HTTPS. So Firefox already has this built in. It already knows about this IP address. Mozilla, they made an arrangement with Cloudflare to use them as their DNS over HTTPS secure provider. So you didn't have to set anything. This was already a default setting within Firefox. So we go out to Firefox and check out this HTTPS connection. This is just regular HTTPS, but something that catches my eye as an analyst. Although this is encrypted, it's secure. Notice some of the patterns that I see here. And this is what I would look for if I saw DNS over HTTPS, and I wanted to make sure that that's what it was that I was looking at. Now you see this 255, 256, 257, these frame lengths here. This gives me a lot of different packets that are smaller going out to that web server. Now, just while I'm looking at the encrypted data, I can see that this is pretty interesting behavior. The client is sending a bunch of this out. It's very likely that all of these are DNS requests. And if I look at the responses, or what are the potential responses, if I come down here and I'm looking at this same conversation, I can see that I'm getting 565s. A bunch of 565s are coming back interlaced with these 123s, right? So I can see that there's no large packets that are fully respecting the TCP MSS. If I go up into the TCP conversation, it's very likely that this conversation can handle significantly larger packets, right? So here's my MSS of 1460, and I can see that on the opposite side is 1460. So this TCP connection can handle larger packets, but the connection's just not using them. And for real web conversations, that's unusual. Usually if you're talking to a web server, you'll have some packets be larger as they're carrying larger payloads. But this is a lot of smaller transactional packets that I see here, even behind that green lock. After that, I see that I can go out to wireshark.org. I see that Mozilla or Firefox just kicked off this secure connection to wireshark.org. So this is very likely my DNS over HTTPS. But let's validate that. So to decrypt this, I'm going to come up here to Wireshark Preferences. Now for you, if you're on Linux or if you're on Windows, that's where you can come over here to Edit Preferences. But I'm on a Mac, so I'm going to go to Wireshark Preferences. And in here, I'm going to go to Protocols. And I'm going to come all the way down here to TLS. So let's just come, I'm just going to hit the T key. And if I come down to TLS, now I went ahead and gave you the SSH keylog with it and hit browse. I'm going to go into keys. I'm just going to say open. So this is that SSL keys.log, and that's where I point Wireshark to where those TLS keys are. And if I hit OK, now you're going to see that all of that formerly encrypted data is now decrypted. So this is where things get interesting. If I come up here, I'm going to notice here, so on packet number 120. So now that we're decrypted, I go out to Mozilla, I establish my TLS handshake, and then I set up a bunch of different streams, and these are different HTTP2 streams that are requesting DNS queries in parallel, or rather, it's multiplexing them to that HTTP2 server. So here I can see a bunch of gets, and notice that section that formerly I was looking at a lot of different small packets. Here I can see these are all gets, get DNS query, get DNS query. And there I can see that I've got a few different responses. This is where if you want to come down all the way, let's scroll. A lot of different busy DNS calls. Now, I didn't type anything into that standard profile in Mozilla, and I don't really use Firefox too much. So this is all just built-in browser chatter when I went to that tab and I opened up wireshark.org. So all of this was underneath the hood. So live science, science news, realsimple.com. None of that stuff is stuff that I typed in. That's just part of the browser. Down here is where I can actually get down to wireshark.org. This is where wireshark.org actually, I do a request and then a response. And then I actually go and I kick off to wireshark.org. So what I'd like to do is I'm actually going to come up here to packet number 346. This is my A record that came back for wireshark.org. I'm going to come down and actually look at the HTTP stuff. So I'm going to collapse my frame info, collapse my Ethernet 2, and I'm going to open up, this is TCP, TLS, HTTP2, expand that out, and I'm going to expand out that this is, my stream ID is 113, this is a data stream, and the DNS just standard DNS is sitting there on top of HTTPS. So we can see that in a way, DNS is just piggybacking on top of this secure channel. Now this is just boilerplate DNS. There's nothing different than any of my videos that you've ever seen about this DNS request and response. In fact, if we take a look at the queries, take a look at the answers, here's our Wireshark.org record that we're requesting, or rather that was requested. This is the one that's being responded to. And here's our answers. So we got 3 answers back, 3 resource records, and here's the addresses for Wireshark.org. So there's our standard UDP payload size when we're usually running over UDP. So very interesting. So this is HTTP2 secure DNS over HTTPS. All right, so after that, we can see that our browser kicks off that connection to Wireshark.org, and we are off to the races, and we now have our established connection. So it's interesting with Firefox. Firefox actually does this natively. It does it by default. The standard setting is to use DNS over HTTPS. So don't be surprised if you're using a browser like Firefox, and honestly the others are soon to follow suit by default, where you see more HTTPS traffic, and you start to see your DNS over UDP start to disappear. So over the coming years, we'll likely start to see this more and more as DNS becomes secured on that last mile between the client and the resolver. So hope you found this interesting. Hope you enjoyed decrypting this file and seeing what it looks like behind the green lock. Stay tuned for more DNS and other packet level info. Thanks for stopping by, Packet People. I will see you again.